Hi, this is Lou Mongello from WDW Radio, and sometimes while we're enjoying some of our favorite Disney films or animated movies, we, or even our children, sometimes step out of that suspended disbelief, and we may ask ourselves, or maybe have that question asked to us, something like, yeah, but how did Peter Pan and Captain Hook meet for the very first time? And sometimes that simple question might be the catalyst to a whole new adventure, and in the case of my next guests, that's very much the case. They are best-selling authors, Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson, who took that question, joined literary forces, as it were, and now are celebrating the fourth in their series of a new adventure of Peter Pan in the Peter and the Starcatchers series. So it is my pleasure to welcome you both to the show.
Thanks, Ridley. It's our fourth in our trilogy, as we've been saying. Math is not our strong suit.
Yeah, I was reading to my then 5-year-old daughter, and J.M. Barrie, who wrote the classic Peter Pan, wrote a play and then a short story and then a novella. And we were reading the novella, like a 100-page story. We were 6 or 7 pages into it, and she covered up the book and said, "Hey, Dad, how did Peter meet Captain Hook in the first place?" When you think about that, there's a boy who can fly that's never explained. He never grows old. It's never explained. He travels with a little personal assistant. It's never explained. All these things go on and on. We thought we'd try to fill in some of those gaps.
He wears tights.
Never explained.
Obviously, that's how the book idea came. How do you two start collaborating on this?
Well, we had been friends for years. We were in a band called the Rock Bottom Remainders, which is the premise of the band was, wouldn't it be great if a bunch of authors with musical talent got together and raised money for charity? And the flaw in that plan was that none of the authors turned out to have any musical talent, but we got together, and the band has some real literary talent. Stephen King, Mitch Albom, Amy Tan, Roy Blunt Jr., Scott Turow, Greg Iles. So the writing's pretty good. The playing, not so good, the music part. But Ridley and I have been in the band since the start, 1992. And have become close friends. Our families have become close friends. And it was at least 10 years. It's like 12 years that we'd known each other. When he came down, the band was playing in Miami, where I live. Ridley was staying at my house. And one morning at breakfast, he said, "Paige had this idea." And
literally, it was a week after Paige had asked me, and I'd been mulling over this thing. Maybe there's a prequel to Peter Pan. And Dave just happened over coffee. He said, "So what are you doing? What are you working on?" Kind of one of those toss-away questions. I said, "I'm thinking about writing a prequel to Peter Pan." And his eyes went, "What?"
When we wrote the first one, when we wrote Peter and Starcatchers, first of all, when we started it, we did not imagine it being that long. It ended up being over 500 pages. We certainly didn't imagine writing a second, third, and now fourth book in this series. And it's just changed. I mean, it really has changed my life, literally. I still write humor, but we've traveled all over the country and into other countries talking about these books. And we've met all these kids. We've gotten involved with Disney, which has turned out to be just wonderful for both of us.
Well, Disney tells us that at least half of our sales are to adults. They've been tracking it, and so and the sales are in huge numbers. So it just shows there's an awfully big adult population reading the books, which is great.
Some of these adults are dressed as Tinkerbell. I should point that out.
And now you have the fourth in the trilogy, The Sword of Mercy.
Well, we can walk you through that.
Yeah, I was going to say, walk me through the process.
We did Peter and the Starcatchers. We thought that was the only book we were doing like this. And we had a great time doing it. Disney thought, maybe there's other books there. And we talked about we had gotten the first book up to the creation of Tinkerbell.
I remember we had this conversation. We were at the BEA, and we had written the Starcatchers. Hadn't come out yet. BEA is the booksellers' big convention. It was in Chicago that year. And Starcatchers hadn't come out yet, but Disney was really liking it, and they set us down for cocktails to all the bigwigs, and they said, "We really would like you to try, to do a couple more." And I remember saying to Ridley, "I don't know. I really don't think there's any more here. I don't know. We don't know it's going to do okay or whatever." I was very negative about it.
And I said, "What about the shadows?" Because I've always been, intrigued by his ability to disconnect from his shadow, leave it behind, all of that. And I said, "What about the shadows?" And Dave said, "That's a 2-sentence book."
It was actually two full books, basically.
Basically 600 pages. So, it worked out. But each one has led to the next. Then we got done with the trilogy, which they made as a box set. We were completely done. And
it really was two things. One, we never stopped hearing from kids. I mean, they were relentless about, when's the next one coming? And it wasn't like a really even a question. It was so much sort of a demand. Of course, there's going to be another one because this is what we do now. We read these books. So that was one thing. But then we really didn't we didn't want it to just feel like we were doing it. Just we had to do another one. And then we had this idea that involved the Sword of Mercy, which is a real sword. It's part of the crown jewels, and it's this very unusual crown jewel, and then it's a broken sword. The tip is missing, and nobody knows where it came from, really. It's said to have been Charlemagne's sword at one time, but there's a legend about where it came from, a legend about how it lost the tip. A lot of legends around the sword, and so we started doing a little research, and it turned out in 1901, which would have been 23 years, we decided after the last book, the Queen Victoria had died after 60-some years as regent, and her son was going to take over, which meant there had to be a coronation, which meant they have to bring out the crown jewels. And we thought, well, what if that event had significance beyond the coronation? What if the bad guys were still around and they could use this coronation somehow? What if they had actually somehow managed to infiltrate the royal family? And
you've got the books and you've got the audio. Certainly, nothing would be better than a Peter and the Starcatchers film.
That's a good idea. Who's listening?
Dave likes that idea. We all like that idea. What Disney has done is Disney Theatrical, who brought you Beauty and the Beast and a million other things, it has developed it as a play with Rick Ellis writing it, who did Jersey Boys, and Dave and I have seen it, and it's spectacular. It's not a musical.
They workshopped it in La Jolla, California. They have a program called Page to Stage where they take the audience knows it's watching a workshop, and they pay to come. And at the end of each performance, the audience stays and gives feedback, and then they rewrite scenes and redo it radically for the next day. Yeah.
Well, each of the books in the series carries forward that same sense of adventure and fantasy and magic and mystery about Peter Pan and Captain Hook and all these characters, as well as the ones that you've introduced. And that's why they are not just wonderful for kids, but wonderful books for parents to read to kids at night. And as a parent and as somewhat of an adult, but with a bit of a Peter Pan complex and never wants to grow up, they're wonderful reads for adults as well. So I can tell you on behalf of everybody who's a Peter and the Starcatchers fan, we hope the series continues.
Well, thanks so much. We appreciate that.
Thanks, Lou. It's been a pleasure.
Ridley Pearson, Dave Barry, thanks so much for joining. Thank you very much for watching. This is Lou Mongello from WDW Radio. We'll go as long as, I have notes, but we'll go whatever.
Oh man, you have notes?
I have notes, yeah.
Okay, I'm leaving. You leaving?
I'm just going to take some notes.
Okay.
If you have notes, I'm going to have some notes.